summary. For years, during the entire duration of his political career, Trump relentlessly and bluntly forced the issue of defending the border into the public debate. He referenced human trafficking cartels, violent expansive gangs, and the fentanyl drug epidemic. In doing so, he created a broad awareness of the need to act. Not only in the USA, but throughout the West, he implemented several policies and actions aimed at defending and securing the U.S. southern border with Mexico. Despite the extensive and serious measures of the Trump administration to oppose uncontrolled immigration, it was greatly reduced but continued. The idea that Donald Trump could have completely shut down the border and built the border wall without resistance after taking office is a gross oversimplification that overlooks several complex realities of politics, governance, law, and conflicting public opinion, as well as the widespread and highly consequential conspiratorial realities beyond the publicly visible political circus. The wave of migration from the Third World to Western countries, including the United States, is not an uncoordinated, spontaneous, organic movement of civilians, but a professionally organized and executed operation orchestrated by politicians, intelligence agencies, the military, and controlled organized crime syndicates. It is an element of a larger conspiracy whose actors are active in all sectors of society and act in an organized sabotaging manner, either through allegiance contracts or blackmail for criminal acts. These bad actors, known as the deep state, operate beyond politics, are not persuaded by political arguments, cannot be reasoned with, and only pay lip service to our democracy, which is their favorite phrase that stands for our camouflaged tyrannical tool against human interests, while calling their opponents a danger to democracy, the usual reality inverting satanic phrases, projecting what they are and do onto others.
Donald Trump is a great threat to our democracy. We know we're different from the president. We're very discreet, reptilian, cold-blooded. These are the races we have to win. No, I'm not a poor baby. I'm more reptilian and cold-blooded and go in to win the election. Donald Trump is a great threat to our democracy.
Crazy Nancy Pelosi sued me. She was always saying, she's crazy as a bedbug, that one. She's nuts. She's a nut.
They provide the trafficking organizations they control with financial resources, technical equipment, and intelligence information on geography, border surveillance, the legal situation, and the exploitation of all this for uncontrolled mass immigration. What look like completely unrelated groups are in fact masks of the same entities. Politics, the judiciary, the military, intelligence agencies, organized crime, cartels, human rights organizations, environmental groups are all infiltrated or completely controlled by bad actors who pursue an anti-human agenda under the guise of humanitarian policies, ethics, environmental protection, etc.
Can be an MS-13 gang member I know about. If they don't reach a certain threshold, I cannot tell ICE about them.
Yeah. We have people coming into the country, or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them. But we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals. And we're taking them out of the country at a level and at a rate that's never happened before.
This is most evident in the form of the MS-13 gang from South America, a satanic reptilian proxy group that regularly performs satanic blood and death rituals, which are typical reptilian acts.
This could be the great Trojan horse of all time. Because you look at the migration, study it, look at it. Now they'll start infiltrating with women and children. But you look at that migration, and I'm looking at it, and I'm the first one to bring it up. 3 weeks ago, I'm saying, isn't that a shame? And then I said to myself, wow, they're all men. There are no men. You look at it, there are so few women, and there are so few children. And not only are they men, they're young men, and they're strong as can be. They're tough-looking cookies. I say, what's going on here? But we got to have borders. We can't let millions of people come into a country. I called it an invasion. You know, I got the wall built by using military funds. I said, our country is being invaded. And I was able to do it. We won 11 lawsuits. Everybody sued me. Crazy Nancy Pelosi sued me. She was always saying, she's crazy as a bedbug, that one.
Donald Trump is a great threat to our democracy. No, I'm not a poor baby. I'm more reptilian.
In a constitutional democracy, there are checks and balances, power is distributed among different branches of government, and political opposition happens within those systems. The president cannot unilaterally make decisions of large magnitude without legislative, judicial, and public input. This idea ignores the multifaceted process required to implement significant infrastructure projects, including budgeting, regulatory compliance, and legal challenges. Government budgeting requires congressional approval, environmental regulations, property rights involving eminent domain laws, and state versus federal jurisdictions. The government cannot act without facing resistance from various stakeholders, such as private landowners, environmental groups, state governments, and advocacy organizations. There are ethical, legal, and practical hurdles involved in pursuing such a massive project. In such a situation, one must first look at the recognizable, sincere intention of a politician, his political will to accomplish a task, and not at the immediately recognizable results. Facing not only massive political resistance in the form of opposition and inter-party opposition, but also a highly influential network of bad actors within the political system known as the deep state is no walk in the park, but represents an almost insurmountable challenge in which every inch in the right direction is a success. This is not accusatory rhetoric, but a fact understood by everyone involved and experienced and viewed with suspicion only by uninvolved bystanders judging from afar. To accuse Trump of doing nothing or not enough for the border demonstrates a lack of knowledge, a limited understanding of how the political system works, insufficient insight into the larger conspiracy, and reflects either ignorance or an intent to portray Trump as a legitimate out of a disingenuous political motivation. In the following, the political process behind the construction of the wall will be roughly described. Trump's policies regarding the construction of the wall and his efforts to control the migrant invasion. It also addresses the opposition's efforts to sabotage the construction of the wall and the efforts to stop the migrant invasion. This may be boring for some, but is essential for those who want a full insight into the situation rather than having the world explained to them by hollow enemy propaganda phrases. Trump's political actions to build the wall. Donald Trump made building a border wall along the U.S.-Mexico border a key part of his 2016 presidential campaign. Shortly after taking office, Trump signed Executive Order 13767 titled Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Improvements, directing federal agencies to begin planning and construction of a wall along the southern border. Trump requested funding from Congress, but only a fraction of the requested funds was allocated by Congress. To pressure Congress into approving his $5.7 billion funding request for the wall, Trump refused to sign any budget bills that did not include this funding. This led to the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, 35 days. After Congress passed a budget with far less than the $5.7 billion Trump requested, Trump declared a national emergency, declaring the border situation to be an invasion in February 2019 to reallocate funds from the Department of Defense and other sources, securing around $15 billion in total funding. Trump's administration faced multiple legal challenges over the use of these funds, but continued construction as court battles proceeded. Trump used provisions under the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, (IRERA) of 1996 to waive certain environmental laws, such as the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. These waivers allowed for construction without conducting full environmental reviews. Construction costs varied by location, But on average, each mile of the new or replacement barrier could cost $20 to $25 million due to factors like terrain, land acquisition, and design. In some areas, the federal government had to acquire private land through eminent domain to construct the wall. Legal battles and compensation for landowners constituted a portion of the spending. Legal fees were also incurred in dealing with lawsuits and challenges against the use of military funds for wall construction and waiving environmental regulations. By the end of his term in January 2021, around 452 miles of border barriers have been completed, which includes new barriers built in areas where none had existed before, and replacing older, smaller, or less effective barriers with more robust structures. In addition to physical barriers, Trump's administration invested in border security technologies such as cameras, sensors, and drones to complement the wall. Trump's political actions to oppose uncontrolled migration. The Trump administration implemented a zero-tolerance policy that led to the separation of thousands of migrant children from their parents at the border. This policy was highly controversial and was eventually halted after widespread criticism. Under this policy, all adults illegally crossing the border were referred for prosecution, resulting in a surge in criminal cases against undocumented immigrants. Remain in Mexico policy, the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, also known as the Remain in Mexico policy, required asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while their U.S. immigration cases were processed. This policy aimed to deter asylum seekers from attempting to enter the U.S. while their claims were pending. Detention of migrants, Trump sought to end the practice of catch and release, where undocumented immigrants apprehended at the border were released into the U.S. while awaiting immigration hearings. His administration increased the detention of migrants to prevent them from being released into the community. Travel ban. Trump issued executive orders that restricted travel from several predominantly Muslim countries, which he argued was necessary for national security. This was commonly referred to as the Muslim ban, though it was modified several times in response to legal challenges. Visa restrictions. The administration imposed various restrictions on visas, including reducing the number of refugees admitted to the U.S., implementing stricter vetting processes, and limiting work visas. Increased funding and personnel. The Trump administration increased funding for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to bolster border security and immigration enforcement efforts. Deploying National Guard. Trump deployed National Guard troops to the southern border to assist with surveillance and other support roles. Safe third country agreements. The Trump administration negotiated agreements with several Central American countries such as Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to require asylum seekers traveling through these countries to seek asylum there first rather than in the U.S. Mexico cooperation. Trump used the threat of tariffs to pressure Mexico into deploying its National Guard to reduce the flow of migrants to the U.S. border and to accept more asylum seekers under the MPP. Pandemic-related expulsions. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Trump administration invoked Title 42 of the U.S. Code, allowing border agents to expel migrants quickly on public health grounds. This effectively closed the border to most asylum seekers. Political actions by Trump's opposition to slow, complicate, and sabotage the border wall. Democrats and leftist organizations have taken a multifaceted approach to oppose or slow down stricter immigration control efforts. Their actions range from legislative opposition, legal challenges, and state-level policies to advocacy, public protests, and campaigns promoting alternative immigration policies. Throughout Trump's term, Democrats in Congress repeatedly opposed funding for the border wall. In budget negotiations for fiscal year 2019, Democrats offered a maximum of $1.375 billion for border wall repairs and upgrades rather than new wall construction, a fraction of Trump's $5.7 billion request. This disagreement over wall funding was a key factor in the 2018 to 2019 government shutdown. Following Trump's emergency declaration in 2019, Democratic lawmakers introduced resolutions in both the House and Senate to terminate the national emergency. While Congress passed these resolutions, Trump vetoed them. Democrats continued to challenge the emergency declaration through legal avenues. Democratic state governments, advocacy groups, and environmental organizations filed numerous lawsuits to block the wall's construction, especially after Trump's use of emergency powers to divert funds. Legal challenges included arguing that the redirection of military funds was unconstitutional and that waiving environmental laws violated due process. Democratic state governments, e.g. California, New York, and left-leaning advocacy groups filed numerous lawsuits to block Trump administration policies, including the travel ban, changes to asylum rules, and family separation at the border. Democratic-led committees, particularly the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, conducted investigations into the Trump administration's handling of border wall contracts, spending, and the waiving of environmental laws. These investigations sought to highlight alleged abuses of power and mismanagement in the wall-building process. Democrats supported lawsuits from private landowners along the border and Native American tribes who opposed the federal government's efforts to seize land for wall construction through eminent domain. They argued that these actions infringed on property rights and disrupted environmentally sensitive areas. Sanctuary cities and states have enacted policies that limit local law enforcement's cooperation with federal immigration authorities. These policies, implemented by Democratic-leaning jurisdictions, e.g. California and New York City, include barring local police from inquiring about an individual's immigration status and refusing to honor ICE detainer requests without a judicial warrant. Organizations like the ACLU National Immigration Law Center, NILC United We Dream, and Move On have organized public campaigns, protests, and advocacy efforts opposing restrictive immigration policies, particularly those perceived as anti-immigrant, such as family separation, the travel ban, and the construction of a border wall. Democratic attorneys general and advocacy organizations filed lawsuits against the Trump administration's public charge rule, which aimed to deny green cards to immigrants who might use public benefits like food stamps. Opponents argued the rule discriminated against low-income immigrants. Democrats and left-leaning organizations have consistently advocated for providing pathways to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, particularly those brought to the U.S., as children, DACA recipients, and essential workers. Several immigrant rights groups and Democratic officials sued to stop the Remain in Mexico policy, which required asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while they're U.S. Immigration cases were processed, arguing it violated U.S. and international asylum laws. House Democrats included language that restricted the use of funds for wall construction. While they couldn't entirely prevent all funding due to the political balance of power, they worked to limit how the allocated money could be used. Joe Biden, once he illegitimately became president, signed an executive order on his first day in office halting further construction of the border wall. This action was supported by the Democratic Party, effectively stopping any additional building that had not been contracted before his inauguration.